Marcus Reeves was 39 years old, and he had never, in 19 years of working job sites, missed a deadline, he said himself. He drove a 14 F-150, charcoal gray, with a crack in the passenger side mirror he had never gotten around to replacing because it bothered no one, and he could still see clearly enough. He kept a thermos of black coffee in the cup holder every morning from 5 a.m. until noon, refilling it once at 7:30 when he stopped at the same gas station on Decatur Road, the one where the woman behind the counter knew his name and had his medium without asking. He wore the same steel-toed Red Wings he'd bought 4 years back and intended to wear until there was nothing left of them. He had spent 9 years building a general contracting business out of a pickup truck and a $4.200 license fee. He had started with residential renovation jobs, bathrooms, kitchens, an occasional deck, and had grown it, methodically, into a firm with 11 full-time crew members and a commercial permit history that now covered 4 counties. The ring was a 2-carat oval solitaire in a simple platinum setting. He had saved 8 months for it. He placed it in her hand on a Friday evening in the kitchen of the house they were renting, and she had said yes before he'd finished the question. He had no idea that 14 months later she would drop it into the kitchen trash can, look him in the face, and tell him she'd already spoken to a lawyer. Before we go any further, drop a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. And subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you won't want to miss. The morning it happened was a Tuesday in late October, and the air in the kitchen had a quality Marcus would remember clearly for a long time afterward. Cool, still, the kind of stillness that arrives ahead of something. He had been up since 4:48. Permits for the Glenview commercial job were due at the city office by noon, and he had been cross-referencing the structural drawings against the final materials list since before the sun came up. His coffee was in the thermos. His laptop was open. He had not yet heard Diane come down the stairs. She came in dressed in a way that registered as deliberate. A blazer, heels she didn't typically wear on a Tuesday. She had a folder in her hand, cream-colored, letter size, and she set it on the counter between them without opening it. "I've been trying to find the right moment to say this," she said. "There hasn't been one, so I'm saying it now." Marcus looked at her. He set his pen down. "I've given this more thought than you probably realize," she said, "and I need something more than what this is. I need you to understand that's not a judgment on who you are. It's just this stopped being the direction I want to be moving in." He said nothing. "I've spoken to someone. An attorney." She opened the folder. The paperwork was already prepared. "We can keep this straightforward." He looked at the top of the first page. The date on it was October 3rd. It was now October 22nd. She had been carrying this for 19 days. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask her which attorney, or since when, or who else had known about this before he did. He picked up his pen. He set it down again. He looked at the folder. That was when he noticed it, or rather, when it surfaced in him the way a discrepancy surfaces when you're reading a set of plans, and something in the numbering doesn't line up. The folder. The tab on the inside edge read Reeves, Final. That was a file name. Not something a person made up on their own for a personal document. That was a document that lived in someone's system. He filed it. He didn't say anything about it yet. "I've thought about this carefully," she said. "I'm being honest with you for the first time, Marcus. That should mean something." He looked at her. He said, "All right." She was expecting something else. He could see that. He could see the slight recalibration in her expression. Then she reached into her jacket pocket. She placed the ring, his ring, the one he had carried in a box for 8 months before he gave it to her, on the counter. She pushed it toward him. Then she picked it up again and she walked to the trash can by the refrigerator, and she dropped it in. "I think it's cleaner this way," she said. He stood there. He needed his truck. He would figure out the rest from there. What she had never taken the time to understand was what Marcus had actually built, not the business, but the thing underneath it. The infrastructure. 2.5 years before that morning, Marcus had incorporated the contracting firm under a holding structure that a retired CPA named Harold Osai had advised him to create. Harold had been his father's accountant for 30 years and now did occasional consulting work. He had looked at the business Marcus was building and said, plainly, on a Wednesday afternoon at a kitchen table with a yellow legal pad between them, "You do not run everything through one account. You separate the asset layer from the operating layer. I have seen too many good men lose things they built because they didn't draw that line." Marcus had drawn the line. He had also, 9 months into the marriage, noticed a shift in Diane. Nothing dramatic. She had begun attending events he wasn't invited to. Professional functions, she said, with people from the firm she was consulting for. She had started a new savings account, separate from the joint. When he asked about it, she had said, "I just want something that's mine. Is that allowed?" He had told her of course it was. He had chosen to believe that was exactly what it was. He had also, over the following 4 months, managed her mother's refinancing paperwork through his office, because Diane had asked him to, and because she said her mother trusted him more than any formal broker. He had done this without charging a fee. He had spent 11 Saturdays on it, driving to her mother's house, gathering the documents, corresponding with the lender. Diane had told him once, during a stretch, when things between them had felt easy, that he was the most reliable person she had ever known in her life. He had thanked her. His site foreman, a man named Curtis, who had been with him 7 years, had said something slightly different and more specific. 2 summers ago, after a late job site walkthrough, "You know what you are, Marcus? You're the load-bearing wall. You're the thing everyone else's structure sits on, and nobody knows it's you until someone tries to move it." He hadn't held on to the compliment at the time. He would think about it again later. That was what she hadn't ever thought to find out about. Her name was Evelyn Cho. She was 61 years old, silver-haired, and for 22 years she had worked as a paralegal at a title insurance company 4 blocks from the courthouse. She had known Marcus's family since before he started the business. She attended his father's funeral. She had watched the marriage from a quiet, careful distance, and she had documented what she saw with the same methodical attention she applied to a closing file. She called Marcus 6 weeks after the morning with the trash can. She asked him to come to her house. She said, "I'm going to lay this out in the order it happened. I need you to let me get through all of it before you say anything." He came. He sat down at her kitchen table. She put a cup of coffee in front of him and opened a manila folder. "The first thing," she said, "is that I know who she was meeting." The records she had kept were organized by date. The first entry was 11 months old. A name Marcus recognized: Donovan Pierce, a commercial developer who had been circling a project in Diane's industry for the better part of a year. The second entry was a vehicle he had never seen in the drive. The third was a dinner receipt, photographed at distance, dated April 7th. Marcus looked at the April entry. He looked at the name on the receipt. He had heard that name once before, on a Sunday morning, approximately 8 months ago. Diane had mentioned it in passing, a contact she'd met through the firm. The word contact had arrived too carefully, like a word someone had practiced sounding casual. He had noted it the way he noted a load calculation that didn't resolve cleanly. He had not said anything. Now it sat in front of him, dated, cross-referenced, attached to a pattern. He said nothing. Evelyn turned to the second section of the folder. "There's more," she said. While you were managing the Glenview permit process, between the 8th and the 18th of October, she accessed the joint account. The transfer was executed in 2 installments. The first was $31,000. The second, 4 days later, was $22,400. Total moved, $53,400. Marcus looked at the table. He set his coffee down. "Which account received it?" he asked. "An account in her name only," Evelyn said. "Opened 14 months ago, shortly after the engagement." He sat with that for a moment. "That," said Evelyn, "is the part your attorney is going to find most useful." She placed the third section in front of him. It was a document she had obtained through a public records search, an LLC registration. The company name was D. Pierce Holdings. It had been registered 12 months ago. One of the listed members was Diane Reeves, Nick Calder. Her contribution to the LLC had been documented in the operating agreement, $53,400. The file name on the folder had read Reeves Final. That was a file living in someone's system. That system belonged to D. Pierce Holdings. Marcus stood up from the table and moved around to stand behind it, looking at everything spread across its surface. He looked at it the way he looked at a full project layout, not piece by piece, but all at once, scanning the whole of it until the connections between elements became clear. He could see the sequencing. He could see the point at which each decision had fed into the next. He could see the thing she had built and how long it had taken her to build it. She had been working on this for 14 months. The ring, the marriage, the joint account, all of it had been running concurrent with a separate plan she had been quietly executing since the month they got engaged. He stood there for a long time without speaking. "Eat something first," Evelyn said from behind him. "Then we can talk about what you want to do." He didn't act immediately. His attorney, a man named David Akebe, who had been recommended to him by Harold Osai, had already begun pulling records before Marcus called him. Harold had flagged the account activity on his own, through the quarterly review he still ran on Marcus's firm, and had handed the initial documentation to Akebe 6 days after the October morning. Akebe had found the LLC registration within 48 hours of receiving Harold's summary. He called Marcus at 6:11 on a Thursday morning, because that was when he worked, and he saw no reason to treat this differently. "I need you to do nothing," Achebe said. "Nothing visible. Nothing she can see. We have 4 weeks of work ahead of us, and I need all of it quiet." A forensic accountant named Patricia Owusu was brought in to trace the full transaction history. What she produced over the following 3 weeks was more complete than Marcus had anticipated. The $53,400 transfer was the most straightforward element. There was also a home equity line of credit, opened against the property they had rented together, using a document Marcus had signed 18 months ago under the impression he was co-signing a joint refinancing inquiry. He had not been. He had signed an authorization form that had been reformatted before submission to the lender. The line of credit was $88,000. It had been drawn in full within 6 days of the filing of the divorce paperwork. The total, $141,400, moved in the months before and immediately following the morning with the trash can. Diane called on a Thursday, 14 days after the title company made its first inquiry. Marcus let the call go to voicemail. She called again the following Tuesday. The second message had lost the composure of the first. She mentioned his attorney. She mentioned people putting ideas in your head. She said, with a studied evenness that had developed a hairline fracture in it, "I think we can settle this the right way." "Marcus, I think we both want to do that." He listened to both messages once. He noted the shift in register between them. He noted the specific word she used, settle, and the particular timing of its appearance in her vocabulary. He did not move fast. That was the thing she had never managed to account for. She had watched him operate for 2.5 years, had accumulated a clear picture of who he was, and had arrived at a confident conclusion about the range of what he was capable of. She had read patience as the ceiling of his ability. She had read reliability as the boundary of his imagination. She had understood that he would not make noise or spectacle. What she had not understood, what she had never had reason to observe, was that patience was not the limit of what he was able to do. It was the method by which he did everything that mattered. He had built an 11-man firm out of a pickup truck and a license fee. He had done it without shortcuts, without spectacle, without anyone outside his immediate circle knowing how close the margins had been in years 2 and 3. He had done it by being patient when patience was the correct tool, and by moving decisively when the documentation supported moving. The documentation now supported it. He called her. His voice was level, cooperative even. He suggested there might be a way to keep the proceedings out of court if both parties were willing to come to the table in good faith. He said he thought that was the right approach. He said he thought she probably agreed. She said yes before he had finished the sentence. He could hear, underneath the measured tone, the specific quality of relief that sounds like a person setting down something heavy. He ended the call. Evelyn was watching him from across the table, her hands folded over her coffee mug. "She thinks it's already over," Marcus said. Evelyn said nothing. She refilled his coffee. Marcus Reeves arrived at the offices of Achebe and Associates on a Wednesday morning at 7:43, 17 minutes before anyone else was expected. He preferred it that way. He stood at the window in the second-floor conference room and watched the street below come to life. The early morning deliveries, a man walking a dog that was walking him. The city doing what it does before anyone arrives to supervise it. The conference room was cold in the way conference rooms are cold when someone has made a deliberate choice about the thermostat. Long table. 8 chairs. Documents organized on one side, where Achebe and Patricia Owusu would sit. Marcus sat across from them, at the center of the opposite side, and he waited. Achebe arrived at 7:58. Owusu at 8:01. They did not remark on the time or ask how he was doing. Diane came in at 8:09 with her attorney, a man named Garrett, who had sent 3 letters in the preceding 6 weeks, and who arrived with the bearing of someone accustomed to being in the room that controlled the outcome. He nodded at Achebe in the professional shorthand of people who had been across from each other before. He did not acknowledge Marcus directly. Diane looked at Marcus once, a quick, composed look, the kind that is trying to communicate nothing and therefore communicates everything, and then turned her attention to his side of the table. Achebe addressed the room. Before any discussion of terms, he said, "There are several matters that need to be established and acknowledged by all parties present." He opened his folder, unhurried, the pace of a man who has been to this room many times and is never nervous to be in it. The first document he placed on the table was the transfer record from the joint account, 2 installments, October 8th and October 12th, totaling $53,400. This transfer, Achebe said, was executed during a period when Mr. Jen Reeves was managing an active permitting process with 2 city offices and was, by documented record, not present at or near the relevant financial institution. The transfer was initiated without his knowledge or consent. He allowed a moment. An unauthorized transfer of marital funds. A civil action has already been filed as of Monday. Garrett looked at the document. He did not look up immediately. Owusu placed the second document on the table. The LLC registration, D. Pierce Holdings. The contribution line, Achebe walked through it without drama: the date of registration, the listed members, the contribution figure, the matching amount from the joint account transfer. He noted the sequence. The LLC was registered 14 months before the divorce filing. The contribution was made within the first month after the filing. The transfer from the joint account to the LLC affiliated account, Achebe said, occurred in 2 installments, dated October 8th and 12th. The LLC contribution is documented in the operating agreement as $53,400. That figure corresponds exactly to the transferred amount. Diane's expression had not moved. The effort required to keep it still was visible to anyone paying close attention. Marcus was paying close attention. The third document was the home equity instrument. Owusu placed it with the same quiet efficiency. Achebe said, "I want to be precise about what we are presenting today and what we are not. We are not making representations about criminal intent or filing. What we are doing is confirming that this documentation exists, is preserved, and will form part of the record in the civil proceedings that are now underway." Garrett looked up from the page. The ease with which he had entered the room had departed his expression. The silence lasted 11 seconds. Marcus counted them. "We'll allow time for review," Achebe said. Marcus stood. He took nothing from the table. He had brought nothing. He buttoned his jacket. He shook Achebe's hand, then Owusu's. He walked toward the door. He stopped. He turned. He looked directly at Diane, and he said it quietly, with no performance, no audience, specifically to her. "You read patience as the boundary of what I was." It wasn't the boundary. It was the method. He walked out. He did not look back. It didn't unravel in a single week. The civil action moved at its own pace, which was slower than Marcus expected and faster than Diane had apparently planned for. D. Pierce Holdings, it emerged, had been capitalized in significant part by the funds she had maneuvered from the joint account, and the LLC itself had committed those funds to a commercial development project that encountered a zoning dispute in its second month of operation. The dispute held the project in administrative review for 4 months. By the time the review concluded, the LLC's operating capital had been substantially drained by carrying costs. Donovan Pierce had other projects. This one became the one he couldn't sustain. The civil judgment in Marcus's case was reached without going to trial. The terms were not made public, but they were, by all relevant accounts, in full alignment with what the documentation had established. Diane's professional network, which had overlapped significantly with Marcus's commercial contacts, people he had worked with, vendors who had dealt with both of them, went quiet in response to her subsequent outreach. This was not coordinated. It was simply the natural behavior of a professional community that observes what happens when documentation reaches the right room. Marcus, meanwhile, was building. He brought on a 12th crew member in November, a structural specialist named Ray, who had worked for a firm Marcus had collaborated with on the Glenview project and who had, more than once, told mutual contacts that he wanted to work for someone whose word was his bond. Marcus called him on a Tuesday morning. Ray started the following Monday. He won a federal facilities contract in February, his first. It had been in negotiation for 7 months, through the entire duration of the divorce proceedings. He had not mentioned it to anyone except Achebe and Harold. He signed the paperwork on a Thursday afternoon at a table with no ceremony, filed the copies, and called Curtis to tell him they were going to need 2 more people by spring. Curtis said, "I told you." Marcus said, "You told me." 14 months after the conference room, Marcus moved the business out of the converted garage space that had served as his office for 6 years and into a proper commercial suite on the 4th floor of a building on Whitmore Avenue. 1,200 square feet, a reception area, a conference room of his own. The first thing he put on the wall was the framed copy of his original contractor's license. He had kept it in a tube in the back of his truck since the day it arrived in the mail, 7 years ago, and he had never known exactly what to do with it. He hung it level, on the wall directly across from the door, so it was the first thing visible when someone came in. He went to his desk. He reviewed the materials request for the spring federal project. He made 2 calls. He put his thermos back in the cup holder when he left the building at 5:30. On a Thursday evening in early March, Marcus sat on the back steps of his apartment building with the last of his coffee and let the cold air do what cold air does in the time before it decides to stay cold or turn into something warmer. The neighborhood was running through its end-of-day sequence. A car pulling in, a window lit up on the 3rd floor across the way, someone's dog doing something at the base of a fence. Nothing urgent. His phone was on the step beside him. It had buzzed twice in the last hour. The first was Curtis with a materials question he had already answered. The second was a number he did not recognize, and then, when he looked it up, recognized Diane. He sat with the phone for a moment. Then he turned it face down on the step, finished his coffee, and went inside. He rinsed the thermos in the sink. He turned off the kitchen light. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've got 2 more picked out that I think you'll really enjoy.